I've pressed it
Yes.
and it's streaming.
Okay, now is it showing on YouTube?
Let me see. Where is YouTube? Is it
YouTube
showing on
should be
YouTube? No, it's
download.
connecting. It's live.
It's live. Okay, cool.
Now, hang on. On my screen here, on the YouTube thing,
Yes.
it's showing me that
Okay.
the mic is off. Should I leave it off?
The mic is off.
The volume
Can you
on
share the screen?
the volume on the
Can you share the screen?
Okay, hold on.
Can you share the screen from YouTube so I can see what you're referring to?
Okay, hold on. Let me see which one. There.
Okay.
You see at the top here? You see there? Should I unmute
Just
that?
hang on, Mr. Fire. Oh, unmute it. Yes, you'll need to unmute it. Unmute that. Okay.
You see at the top here? You see there? Should I unmute
Just
that?
hang on. You need to monitor that to see if people. Oh, unmute it. Yes, you'll need to unmute it. Unmute that. Let me try and log in.
You see at the top here? You see there? Should I unmute
Just
that?
hang on. You need to monitor that to see if people. Oh, unmute it. Yes, you need to unmute it. Unmute that. Let me try and log in.
You see at the top here? You see there? Should I unmute
Just
that?
hang on. You need to monitor that to see if people. Oh, unmute it. Yes, you need to unmute it. Okay, that's unmute. Let me try and log in.
You see at the top here? You see there? Should I unmute
Just hang on. You need to monitor that to see if people. Oh, unmute it. Yes, you need to unmute it. Okay, that's unmute. Let me try and log in.
You see at the top here? You see there? Should I unmute
Just hang on. You need to monitor that to.
Don't exit red box. Top left. Yes. There. Go back to the top left.
5 direct from the top left, 5 direct from the left, top left. You see that red, move your mouse to the red. You were there just now. There. Go back to the top where it says SAMSA fish safety on the top left, not the middle top. Move your mouse, drag it again. You were there just now. There. Try to drag it again. Where it says SAMSA fish safety on the left, not the okay. Maybe just check. Move your mouse, drag it again. You were there just now. There. Try to drag it again. Where it says SAMSA fish safety on the left.
Good morning, colleagues.
Middle top. Move your mouse, drag it again.
The time is 10 past now. I think we need to start the program. We've got half good morning, colleagues. Expect you for today. My name again is colleagues now. I'm your program director for the day. Welcome to the sixth fishing safety INDABA, courtesy of SAMSA. My name again is Maritime now. Safety was mandated to inculcate a culture of safety within the fishing industry. This decision by the then Minister was triggered by the escalating fatalities at sea and the continuous improvement of safety practices, codes, safety standards, regulations, improved welfare of seafarers have yielded positive results towards zero deaths. The fishing industry, colleagues, as you may know, is the major employer of more than 20,000 people from disadvantaged fishing communities. It is a sector that contributes immensely on the South African GDP. This is a sector, colleagues, that has been subjected to adverse marginalization due to political, social, and economic challenges. It is, however, pleasing, ladies and gentlemen, and exciting to note the transformation efforts of government to redress the inequalities has a solution. The allocation of fishing rights to small-scale fishers is a huge milestone in the history of the fishing industry. The recognition of rights of traditional fishers is a step in the right direction towards creating a sustainable, equitable, small-scale fishing sector. We therefore all have a huge responsibility, ladies and gentlemen, to ensure the well-being and livelihoods of small-scale fishing communities. As we may know, ladies and gentlemen, any transformation initiatives are fraught with challenges, doubts, and negativity from naysayers. It's about time to create a capable and developmental state. It is about time to create a vibrant maritime economy subjected to adverse marginalization due to political, fishing Nigel Campbell. It's about time to create a capable and developmental state. He will be taking. It is about time to create a vibrant maritime economy subjected to adverse marginalization due to political, fishing Nigel Campbell. It's about time to create a capable and developmental state. He will be taking. It is about time to create a vibrant maritime economy subjected to adverse marginalization safety due to political, fishing Nigel Campbell. About time to create a capable and developmental state. He will be taking. It is about time to create a vibrant maritime economy subjected to adverse marginalization safety due to political, fishing Nigel Campbell. About time to create a capable and developmental state. He will be taking. It is about time to create a vibrant maritime economy subjected to adverse marginalization safety due to political, fishing Nigel Campbell. About time to create a capable and developmental state. He will be taking. It is about time to create a vibrant maritime economy subjected to adverse marginalization safety due to political, fishing Nigel Campbell. About time to create a capable and developmental state. He will be taking. It is about time to create a vibrant maritime economy subjected to adverse marginalization safety due to political, fishing Nigel Campbell. About time to create a capable and developmental state. He will be taking. It is about time to create a vibrant maritime economy subjected to adverse
main fishing and dance license we carry on safety workshops, communities, we need to sit with the industry and discuss, try and avoid it happening again. And as you well know, through marine notices every year, marine notice number 1 looks at the deaths in the fishing industry, why they happened, what we're going to do to avoid it repeating itself. Try and avoid and also you have read in the Maritime press various articles through marine notices every year, marine notice number 1. I think it's fair to say that we have made a lot of progress. If we look at the death rate since our last INDABA in 2018, there were only 5 that year. Sorry, 3 in 2018 and 5 in 2019. So we're still searching to reach that period where we can turn around and say we now have 0 deaths. There has been a vast improvement in safety culture since 2002 when we held our first campaign. The credit must be given to the industry for their efforts in partnering us to make 0 deaths. The world's most dangerous occupation is safety culture. On the legislative front, we continue to try and update our legislation. The industry for their efforts in partnering us. That legislation should reflect international best practice and the requirements of the various UN bodies. Unfortunately, this is not without its challenges. The regulations for the construction of equipment and fishing vessels were submitted to government in December 2012, directly after the diplomatic conference that led to the adoption of the Cape Town Agreement. The regulations for the under 24-metre regulations have finally been promulgated, only taken 7 years, and those comments are workshopped and submissions will be made to the DOT in the very near future. The over 24-metre regulations will undergo the same process as soon as we get together and lock down if it is efficient. That work not only gives effect to the Cape Town Agreement, to which South Africa is no party, but also takes our 52-year-old regulations into the 21st century. So that on its own is a giant leap when we get there. That work not only gives effect to the Cape Town, there are still both Act and regulatory amendments outstanding to give full effect to Convention 188, the working fishing. Again, we need to finish updating our 69-year-old Act, nearly as old as me, that governs the employment of working conditions as it stands today, but hardly reflects the society we live in South Africa, all world best practice. Hopefully this happens with the final revision of the Merchant Shipping Act. When we had the quarterly inquiry for the Lindsay Euro to Brazil collision, in which 14 fishers died, one thing we realized is that the Court of Marine Inquiry regulations, being 59 years old, were totally out of date. Didn't even consider electronics, voyage data recorders, etc. One thing we realized is that with the help of Andrew Pike from the legal side, we did a lot of work. We revised the regulations, revised the Act, sent it to the Department in 2007, never even promulgated for comment. The revision of the STCWF regulations is ongoing, and I'm not going to touch that subject. I will leave that to the Chief Examiner, when he speaks to you shortly. I think this begs the question, is it time to move away from regulations and start using codes which have the same legal force that can be amended by the authority, with obviously the necessary checks and balances in place. It begs the question primarily that anything we do is not away from unconstitutional. Start using codes which have the same legal force that can be amended by the authority. There must be a method in place to speed up the modernisation of by the current chambers of the Fishing Industry Bargaining Council. An excellent step forward to improve employment and working conditions in those other sectors. On the international front, there are now finally several international instruments in place to improve safety standards in the fishing industry and working conditions, including the Cape Town Agreement and the Torremolinos Protocol, Convention 188, Work and Fishing, as well as the STCWF, several international Convention of 1995. SAMSA continues to be recognised as a world leader on these issues. Recently, we were approached by the Dutch Fishing Vessel Owners Association to request our interpretation of a clause in Convention 188. Why would we ask? Because we were the first country in the world to undertake full state-controlled inspections of fishing vessels to request our interpretation of a clause, and our expertise in this subject is recognised because we were the first country in the world. We've been requested both by the IMO and the ILO to assist countries to ratify and implement both the Cape Town Agreement and Convention 188. And in the last 2 years, we've been active in Indonesia, by the Philippines, and the Seychelles to assist countries to ratify. And you'll be pleased to know it can cost us a penny. All those things are paid for by the various UN organisations. In October last year, I was lucky enough to attend with the Deputy Minister of Transport the International Conference on Fishing Vessel Safety and Unreported, Irregular and Unregulated Fishing. And it's probably the largest fishing conference other than the Cape Town Agreement to be held in the history of IMO. 14 states have ratified the agreement, and a further 48 states signed the Torremolinos Declaration, which commits entry into force on the 10th anniversary in 2022. 14 states have ratified the agreement. The initiative has slowed down slightly because of the COVID pandemic, and I read yesterday that there will be no IMO meetings in person until 2021. Everything is going to be done virtually because of the COVID pandemic, and I read yesterday. I think it's fair to say that in person. In 3 weeks' time, I enter my 50th year in this industry, and 21 years at SAMSA. And I believe that this is probably going to be my swan song, officially anyway, in fishing vessel safety. But be warned, I will be watching you. Marine Notice number 1 of every year, written by Selwyn at present, will be the first thing I read about fishing safety. I wish you well for the conference. I look forward to concrete outcomes, and especially a commitment from government that we are going to get on and modernise our legislation. Thank you very much, and I hope to see some of you in the next 6 weeks before I finally go gardening. Cheers, goodbye.
Thank you, Captain, and thank you for paving the direction on the journey that we've taken together with our industry players. I've noted the most interesting message that Captain has alluded to, in that we need to give credit to the industry. Without the industry players and the partners, we wouldn't have achieved what we have achieved. And Captain has also indicated, colleagues, that this journey is not without any challenges. There are challenges that we're experiencing towards our zero death target. But we're hopeful that with the participation and working together with the industry that we will succeed. One other question that a challenge that Captain has posed to us is it a time to move away from regulations to codes? And I believe that as we move on to other presenters, that question will be responded to. Colleagues, without wasting your time, let's move on to the next speaker. Next speaker is someone who is well known to the fishing industry, our fisherman, who is an expert in the fishing field, Selwyn Bailey. Selwyn is our fishing specialist and will be taking us through the statistics or within the fishing industry. And this is where, colleagues, we will see whether we're moving in the right direction or not. Over to you, Bailey.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, all the attendees from the fishing industry. Morning, colleagues, acting CEO, Deputy Chief Operation Officer, and all other interested parties. My name is Selwyn Bailey, and I'll be presenting on the safety statistics in the commercial fishing industry. So these are the topics I'll be talking about. I'll be talking about the fatalities, and then there's another concern, serious injuries in the fishing industry, lessons learned from investigations into casualties, findings during ad hoc surveys, and some measures that we've introduced to minimize the risk, of which Nigel has already mentioned quite a number of things. So as an introduction, SAMSA remains committed to work with the fishing industry towards zero deaths, as per the challenge set at the last INDABA in Maritime in 2018. At this point, I would wish to also, like Nigel, appreciate and thank the fishing industry for all the efforts towards making this industry safe for fishers going to sea. We note that there has been difficult times, specifically this year. We know what we're talking about, and their commitment to safety is unwavered, and I want to personally also thank them for that. So we have all seen this graph before, that both the program director and Nigel alluded to, for those huge numbers of deaths in the early 2000s, and where we are now in the last decade. I would like to focus on the last decade. Nigel has mentioned that last 2 years after our last INDABA, in 2018 we had 3 deaths, all 3 on small vessels under 10 meters. 2 of them incidents that happened in on the west coast, where a small boat was lost in the fog and ended up on the reef, and in both incidents 2 fishers died. In 2019 we experienced 5 deaths. 2 of those deaths are also small vessels capsizing in bad weather, and then the 2 of the 5 was 2 fishermen caught up in a confined space on a pelagic vessel on the west coast, and we lost 2 guys. So on the next slide, I want to focus on the last decade.
So it's live.
So in the last decade, we lost 75 commercial fishermen in this industry. And 52% of that figure happened on small vessels capsizing in bad weather. That is one of our biggest concerns in terms of trying to come to zero deaths, is to focus attention down on wherever these guys are operating. The other section of this breakdown of the 75 deaths, 31% occurred in two incidents on larger vessels, and also happened during bad weather where people ended up in the water. And the 15% is happens during operational events, like these five guys the two guys I spoke about in the. Sorry, I'm just struggling with my power. Give me a minute. Andy, can you just help me quickly? Wiggle this. I'll carry on while I'm struggling with this power. Yeah, just wiggle here. I'm just wiggle this. Sorry. Sorry, being the first.
Bunky, your mic's off.
Colleagues, we seem to have a connection. We will be encouraging the colleagues to air their inputs and comments on the chat room, and we'll collate all those comments after the two speakers, and we will be attending to them.
I'm back.
Okay, thanks, Selwyn.
Sorry. So as the first presenter of presentations, that was bound to happen. Slide I've covered, those are our two big concerns. The small scale guys, the smaller guys going to sea in bad weather and being unprepared and ending up in the water and we're losing people. And obviously the other two of the larger incidents are maybe questionable decisions made in bad weather. And if that falls away, we'll be very close to our target of zero deaths. The other incident, concern that I mentioned after we reach the zero death is we see a surge in serious injuries. We have sent out a marine notice covering these serious injuries. And in this slide, I want to bring your attention to some of these things. Like in one, we have a crew member on the trawler cutting off a part of his finger, where there was safety equipment, PPE available, but it wasn't used. One thing we've picked up a lot are winch operators or people getting caught up in winches, dropper lines during long line operations. We had two major incidents recently where one person suffered multiple fractures and the other person also caught up in a line hauler, suffered severe and permanent injuries as a result. We're also still finding some serious injuries happening on the fishing trawler decks, specifically during hauling and shooting operations. And it's one thing that we want to bring the attention to the fishing operators, skippers and fishermen. And we include this awareness or this issue in our awareness engagements with the industry. The other thing that we've been doing is that after investigations into casualties, we present or we publish marine notices to highlight the lessons learned in when we make findings of those casualty investigations. So of the most common issues that we find, there's no record of assessments or hazard analysis that was done, or it wasn't done properly, failure to adhere to safety procedures where companies and operators have procedures in place and crewmen or officers do not follow those procedures. Like in the incident where the person cuts off his finger, failure to wear the available PPE. The other major incident that we're concerned about is this winches and winch stops, specifically on those line haulers. We also identified that there's insufficient training and awareness of crews in terms of the potential hazards. During a recent investigation into the grounding of a trawler that we had in May, we picked up various performance deficiencies in failure to carry out proper passage planning or using navigational charts or clear instructions from one watchkeeper to the another, and failure to use the appropriate navigational aids which is available. So those are all in the marine notices that we send out to the industry. One of the other measures that we have in place is the ad hoc inspection regime, which was introduced in 2001, in an effort to ensure that skippers and owners discharge their responsibility between survey periods. What we can report here that we've noted an improvement in all of the findings, like in terms of emergency drills that wasn't there before. We've noted a marked decrease in findings around whether there are any emergency drills done or people know what they're doing. The authority also noted a decrease in the findings regarding inoperative safety equipment, expired equipment, lack of medical certificates, or cases where safety training was not completed, like the familiarization. We also note there's a decrease in findings in incidents where safety officers are not appointed or there are no safety officers. However, we do have to guard against the fact that some of the safety officers, when they are appointed, are not carrying out the assigned duties, and something we need to bring to the attention of the industry. The safety culture that SAMSA is trying to inculcate, much of these things have been mentioned by Nigel before in his opening statement. So we're looking at the regulations, we're looking at the codes, and we try to ensure that they reflect world best practice. We have these management audits in terms of the maritime occupational safety regulations, where we have where we partner with the managers of fishing companies operating over 25 gross ton vessels. And we have robust engagement with them in terms of improving their safety. Also, the surveys and ad hoc inspections plays a huge role in getting that safety culture to where we want it to be. We also have a whole host of consultative communication through awareness engagements, industry INDABAs like this one, where SAMSA's fishing unit attend AGMs and present on issues, current issues. We offer casualty investigation training to fishing companies and fishing operators, which was one of the things that was requested at the first INDABA that I attended in 2011. Sorry, it was not the INDABA, it was when we had the NFF issue established, where industry requested that training and SAMSA is offering that training. We also have the National Fishing Forum, and we have various legislative guidance workshops with the industry in trying to inculcate the safety culture. Most of these things Nigel has mentioned. The implementation of new legislative requirements, the ILO, we all know about the Work and Fishing Convention, the work that's been has gone into that, and industry has come to the party on the requirements in terms of safe practices, in terms of living conditions, and in terms of crew agreements and such. Nigel has spoken about the Cape Town Agreement and where we stand on that sets of regulations of over under 24 meters. There's also the Ports and Vessels Agreement, of which DAF is the authority to ensure compliance with these fishing issues, and SAMSA partner with them. So when DAF does an inspection based on the Ports and Vessels Agreement, they normally request SAMSA to have a look at the labor issues, the Work and Fishing Convention issues. So in terms of the management audits, under the Maritime Occupational Safety Regulations, we have a two-pronged approach where we push for the enforcement, but we also promote the awareness. We would have contact with the company. Normally we will meet with a manager, senior manager who's in charge of the safety, and we'll go through a host of requirements in terms of risk assessment, hazard analysis, mitigating measures, safety officers, safety appointees and safety committees, and safety procedures stemming from these risk assessments. We also promote the issue by trying to increase knowledge on the legislation. We share some solutions, we share and we raise awareness overall by giving guidance on compliance. And my last slide, we do other things as well, like leaflets and other informational documentation. That is my last slide. Thank you for your attention, and sorry for the break in the communication. Thank you, Bongi.
Bongi, could you come back online, please?
Thank you, Solon, and thanks for taking us through the journey in the fishing industry with regards to the statistics and the causes of the deaths, fatalities that we have encountered thus far. I think the message that Selwyn has posed to us is the continuous improvement within the fishing industry to ensure that we create awareness as much as we can. And it's only the training communication as well as the awareness that will assist towards the reduction of the death rates. Our colleagues, we will now take the questions from the two speakers that we've had thus far. And the questions for Selwyn and Nigel that we have, we see that the colleagues, they are quite active in the chat room. The first question that we have is from Pedro. And the question is SAMSA aligning is SAMSA aligning small-scale fisheries programs with the current SSF developments, as alluded by the program director? First one. And the second one, the NSF program has significantly contributed to a culture of safety in this sector, but it has since faded away. The second one, a comment from Clark. There are gaps in stats, particularly in the informal industry. Divers, abalone, lobsters, can this be addressed? Colleagues, I think let us respond to those two questions for now. Over to you, Selwyn.
Sorry, I was looking at the chat. Can you just repeat question one for me, please?
Question one is the alignment of SAMSA with the small-scale fisheries program.
Okay. What SAMSA has done in terms of the small-scale fisheries program, we have been in communication with DEF about the rollout plan in the Eastern Cape. We understand from DEF that there are only two cooperatives in the Northern Cape, and they have sorted out their teething problems there in terms of the issue. We do have an office in the Northern Cape sector where that person running the office is actively involved in the safety issues with that small community there. In the Eastern Cape, we have been communicating with DEF, and as they roll out the small scale, SAMSA will be there and we will be doing safety awareness, and we are looking at ways to ensure that we introduce the pre-sea training and identify the keepers and offer safety guidance to those communities. There are also a few co-ops that were identified down in KZN or up in KZN, depending on where you're sitting. And we will be active there as well. I'm not sure where the question comes from. I hope I've given some answer to that question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Selwyn, for that. The second one is about the culture of safety in the sector and the fact that the NSF program, it has withered away.
The NSF program, I'm not sure I understand that correctly. Are you talking about the NFF program?
I'm sure it's supposed to be NFF.
Okay. When the NFF was established, we did have some members from representing the small scale up on the West Coast. And then that was when they were called subsistence fishermen and interim relief fishermen. We identified that we needed to bring them around the table, and they were there. Then the small-scale policy came into being, and DAF indicated that they will be introducing this new concept. And we have been, in our communication with DAF, we have been waiting so that we can get the proper representatives back around the table, stemming from the DAF rollout. So there's every intention to include them around the table, yes. I'll answer that question.
Thank you. Thanks, Selwyn. The last question.
It's for Nigel.
They keep on coming. I thought that this was the last. Another question from Greg. How can we modernize our legislation without making the regulations so onerous and without including the participation of the SMMEs and the small fisheries sector?
I think Nigel can answer that because he alluded to the issues around regulation in terms of having codes and replace regulation. So if Nigel is still here, he can answer that question for Greg.
Okay, Captain Nigel.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, looking at Greg's question, there are a couple of things there. Of course, all regulatory review has to be done with the partners. And when one submits the motivation to the Department of Transport, one of the things they always asked for was to demonstrate that you have interacted with your social partners, you have listened to their queries, you have replied, and where you have replied and they still don't like the answer, you have to motivate why. So I think that's the first thing. Then I think what we need to look at are two different issues. One is fishers that are working purely in South Africa, not even going to Namibia or Mozambique, as opposed to those fishers who would want to serve on foreign flag vessels, to want to take their skills outside of the country, and then your legislation that gives them that qualification has to be in line with international requirements, because those vessels will be subject to port state control. So you have to be able to indicate that the certificate of competency you issued is issued in line with the requirements, in this case of FCCWF. So it's a balancing act.
Thank you, Captain. The next question is from Tauri, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. Is it fair to state that the opening up of the fishing economy to the wider, previously disadvantaged communities led to reduction in fatalities in the industry, since the majority need not resort to poaching?
Who's answering that? Me.
Salwen, did you get that one?
Repeat, please.
Is it fair to state that the opening up of the fishing economy to the wider, previously disadvantaged communities led to reduction in fatalities?
I think that we have successfully engaged the small-scale sector on the West Coast prior to the small-scale policy being rolled out. So that same work will go into the new entrants coming in. So we would expect that our safety culture will remain as is, and we will continue that momentum. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question.
Okay. Thanks, Salwen, for that. The last question, I suppose, for this section is, can you explain a bit more about code versus legislation? And try to be as brief as possible. And Captain Nigel, I wish to bring you back to respond to this one. Can you explain a bit about the difference between the code as well as the legislation?
Yes, if we look internationally, that is the way many of the authorities have gone, especially countries that were part of the then British Empire. because they're stuck with the same acts and regulations that we have. A code is a technical document that would be written by the authority, by SAMSA, workshopped with industry, agreed upon, and then submitted or either by us or by the DOT to be promulgated through government gazettes. Our current practice of amending regulations only requires the minister's signature. It doesn't need debate in Parliament or anywhere else. But unfortunately, we seem to have a bottleneck there. Until recently, we went through a gap of, I think it was 14 years with nothing being promulgated. And that can't happen. Obviously, we appreciate Act amendments have to go through Parliament, different process altogether. But a code can be a living document. It can be amended whenever required. If there's been an accident and we've identified something, and if my memory serves me right, if you look at the Code of Safe Working Practice for fishermen and fishing vessels, I think that's the 6th amendment that we've done to it, and it has the force of law because it is mentioned in the Act. So we believe that codes can be a much quicker, efficient way of updating our legislation from lessons learned or changes to international practice.
Thank you, Kate. Colleagues, we're noting your comments on the chat room, and some of them they will be responded to by the respective colleagues. Colleagues, let's move on and introduce another panelist that will be taking us through the presentation on STCW. This person is also well known within the industry, is a SAMSA Chief Examiner. And let's welcome colleagues on board Azwi to take us through his presentation on STCW. Over to you, Azwi.
On mute. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning to everyone. I was watching the chat room and I see some of the questions already relate to this, to some of the issues that I will touch on. This is the second fishing INDABA that I'm attending, the previous one being the 2018 fishing INDABA, where I made a presentation regarding the training of fishers and the approach that we ought to take. And this presentation that I'm making today is a continuation of the same presentation, firstly to refresh our minds of what was said back then, and secondly to show some of the small steps that we've taken to push forward the agenda of fisher training and education. So the presentation is not very long. There's a total of 9 slides. Okay, I think this is moving too fast. Just hang on. Okay. How do I? Okay. Okay. I've got it now. So the presentation is it's not very long. It should be done in the next 20 minutes. So I'll start by recapping some of the slides from the 2018 presentation that I made, including the proposal thereof of how we're going to do. And we're going to discuss also the arrangements that exist for the training and education of fishers, and where we get the ideologies from, and then the steps to formalize the training and education for fishers, and a little bit of evolution of certificates through since the 1993 regulations, and our role in the progress. I think if you just from the questions that some of the speaking that happened with my colleagues or those who spoke before, the issues that keeps coming up, particularly from Selwyn's presentation, we've had in the last decade or so, the fatalities in the fishing industry has been quite low, except for 2016 and 2017, where for 2015 and 2017, where the fatalities were in the double digit. And also, if you look at the recommendations that keeps coming up in this, whether we go back to the Court of Marine Inquiries or the investigation reports, they talk about safety recommendations, things like risk assessments and hazard identifications and things like that. And the question we may have to ask ourselves is that the tweaking of education and training that we've undertaken since 2001, is it going to take us through that floor to zero? Because we've had 2 years where we had two fatalities, or a year where we've had 2 fatalities, and 2018 3 fatalities, 2019 5 fatalities. I think most of us would agree that we do not want that 2018 to be the bottoming out of the fatalities, and things could get worse. And in my view, it is time to take the next steps in that to make sure that the competency of seafarers is what takes us to the floor, which is a 0 fatality for the next couple of years. So I'll move on with the presentation. So this slide is from the 2018 presentation. When we talk about vessel safety or fishing safety, there's 5 components that we talk about. We talk about the construction of the ship, the stability, watertight or built-in buoyancy of the vessel, particularly the last one on small vessels. We talk about machinery and fittings, and we talk about safety equipment. And at all times, the important bit through the life cycle of a ship or a fishing vessel is the competence of the crew, because you can build a really good ship. Most of us will remember the Titanic was called the unsinkable, but the people who were on board, their actions led to the sinking of the Titanic. If we think about many incidents, both in locally and internationally on fishing vessels, the human element plays a big role, and we must keep going back. Would a structured education and training have helped minimize or reduce or completely eliminate those incidents. And in most cases, one would possibly say yes, but it's a question that we need to, or the answer that we have to come up together with as a collective. Having discussed that, this was the last slide, that through properly structured education and training for fishers, we can break that floor that has been created of zero to say, or we can reach the floor that has been created to have years and years of nil fatalities within the fishing industry in South Africa. And not just the fishing industry, but the maritime industry as a whole. The question was whether the kind of education and training that we must that will take us there is something that we must invent or reinvent what already exists, or adopt something that we know, adopt something that exists and adapt it to our local situation. My recommendation, and it's still my recommendation even now, is that we should adopt what exists and what works and adapt it to various elements of the industry. To be more specific, we then, if we're going with that strategy of adopting what exists and adapting it to our situation, we have a bit of a gap in that for small vessels, there's a national small vessel safety regulations, which covers inland waters in South Africa and our coastal waters for small vessels less than 25 gross tons. And whether you're talking about somebody who's going for fishing or somebody who uses small vessels for other leisure or commercial activities, the small vessels create a synergy in the training that if you train somebody on a vessel which is taking passengers for leisure activities as a commercial activity, you can transport those skills to the fishing industry and vice versa with some induction or familiarization necessary. If you go to fishing vessels over 24 meters, you do have the fishing, or the STCWF, which is a convention of the IMO. South Africa is a party to that convention. And we're going to, the regulations that are in draft at the moment does address that directly. Then we have a very large fishing sector between 25 gross tons, or just over between small vessels and those over 24 meters, which there is no standard set elsewhere other than that which we have to set in South Africa ourselves. And we've had the current regulations of 2013 have not been pushed, have not been published, which SAMSA is found, SAMSA is responsible for making sure that it's effective, but it's not yet effective. And that's taken 7 years so far. When we did the workshops last year in November, we had a day in Port Elizabeth and a day in Cape Town, where we had arguments from various players in the industry talking about standardized training. And the SAMSA view on standardized training is that vessels under 24 meters, over 25 gross tons, the training should be standardized. And there's those who say that's too much for certain vessels who only operate in certain sectors. And those those who argued that the training should be standardized enough that a fisher should be able to easily transport their skills from one type of fishing vessels to another. And it is an argument that when we, after the workshops, when we're considering the final regulations, we thought that those who say that the skills should be transportable in that subsector, if we can call it, is more conducive. It's easier from a training point of view. It will be much easier other than having more accreditation. It's a single accreditation where somebody completes the training, and then the more specific issues will be on the vessel, on the vessels that they work on, and then the skills could be transported from one vessel to the other, whether they're remaining in the Republic alone or whether they do go or elsewhere or offshore to other vessels. They remain available for that skill is transportable. The actions that we've taken since then to formalize the education and training of fishers since the previous fishing INDABA. Obviously, most of you would know from the workshops we had last year in November and the publication by the Department of Transport of the same regulations that the 2013 regulations have been revised, or there were attempts to amend it, but after much work, the decision was that instead of amending, because the amendments were too numerous, we will publish new regulations and repeal the 2013 regulations. And that's the process that the Department of Transport agreed to. We are hoping that the regulations at the moment, they are with the Department of Transport. We are hoping that within their lawyers will have will complete going through them before the end of this month, and they will be presented for the Minister for promulgation. Some of you did comment on those regulations, and the Department of Transport have taken the necessary steps to respond to the comments that you had made. And some of the comments have caused the final regulations that have been taken to the department's legal department to be amended to take into account the comments that you made. In summary, there is no changes in manning requirements for officers on fishing vessels. There's little changes in the manning for ratings for fishing vessels, and the changes that you see or that we're talking about will be those that you saw in the earlier marine notice that SAMSA published earlier this year. There is new certificates, particularly taking into account the less than 24 meters and over 24 meters, and different size of engines as well. I've taken an excerpt from the regulations, and you will see in the next slide. The specific competencies and proficiencies that are required will be set in the training standards code, which is going to be in place of the SAMSA code. Essentially, it is not SAMSA, the code is owned by, whilst SAMSA is the custodian, the code is for industry, both those who are the seafarers or the fishers, and those who are going to be affected by it. And In working with the Department of Transport, they insisted that the publication or the development of the training standards code should be subject to the principle of public consultation. I think Captain Campbell and Selwyn earlier alluded to this, that when we publish the codes, this should be subject to public consultation. So you will see the public consultations. There will be a few public consultations early in the upcoming year. That the new training standards code that are being worked on for your comments and for your input as well. We've had numerous engagements with the industry since then, and one of the engagements from then was was regarding the regulations, as I alluded to on the previous point. This is an excerpt from the draft regulations that we workshopped last year with certificates, and you will see that with the 2013 regulations didn't, for example, for deck officers, differentiate between limited and unlimited waters. It just had under 24 meters, and we've separated that. Previous regulations didn't equate the marine motorman to new certificates, and we've aligned those two. So the 2020 column focuses on the implementation of the STCWF. And all of this would not work unless both SAMSA and industry work together. And whilst SAMSA sits in the driving seat, there is a lot of work and in the form of contribution, criticism, and objections that the industry should have, and in the process that, or the legislative process, or as we spoke about the codes. The codes will also be part of that legislative process, and will be, as we put them out there for comment, the industry should contribute, should criticize, and should raise their objection. I think the important bit is that the contribution should be based on facts, studies, or reason. I think on the comments, there is arguments already about some papers that are out there. Some people saying that things are not based on facts. So SAMSA has an obligation to bring facts forward when we propose an action or a way forward. And I think equally, the industry has a right to question the facts that we've got and where those facts come from. And the criticism should be fair and constructive, and the objection should not prevent development, but also provide better alternative or solutions. So if SAMSA is to make a proposal to say this is how we plan to proceed, or to come up with a solution to a challenge, then when we raise objections, we should not be saying there shouldn't be a solution, but we should be saying, yes, a better solution, or yes, an alternative solution, that should be considered. And as I think Captain Campbell alluded to, SAMSA will always consider, as to their best ability, the input, any input, be it contribution, criticism, or objection from industry on merits, and also be responsive and provide feedback to those who make submissions during any consultative process. And yeah, I think that's the end of my slides. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Azri. Colleagues, as expected, this presentation has attracted lots of questions, comments, and inputs. And the question that Azri has posed to us is whether the current education and training is assisting towards our audacious goal of zero fatalities. And if it's not, what is it that we need to do? And we invite inputs from the stakeholders and industry players on how we can shape our education system so as to be relevant. As we, together with the other panelists, we have a couple of questions for this session. The first question is from Tembela. It goes like this: was an assessment made to determine just how many fishers are interested in broadening their expertise into other countries outside of South Africa before imposing international legislation and industry and training requirements on the industry? Did you get that one, Azri?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
I will take two, and then the panelists can respond. The second one is, how is SAMSA trying to include small-scale fishers more proactively in dialogue about safety training? Thank you. Let's take those. Let's respond to those colleagues, and I'll take the rest afterwards.
Okay. Let me attempt to address the first question by Ms. Taboshe. There is no studies that have been done to assess as to whether there is any fishers who are interested in fishing elsewhere. But what we do know is the following. There's quite a number of South African fishing vessels who eventually find themselves in Namibia, in places like Namibia, and less so in Angola and Mozambique. And with that, as soon as you cross over to Namibia, Namibia have a right to then apply the legislation that applies in that country. And so far, we're quite fortunate that they're still using the same Merchant Shipping Act that we use. But in terms of the regulations, they are very, they have moved on, and to a large extent are applying the STCWF. And we've had a number of queries over the years that have been in this position as chief examiner, where they're asking, has SAMSA or South Africa implemented STCWF? And how then do they deal with, when we say no, how then do they deal with the requirement of STCWF on those vessels? And it is a constant challenge that we're having to deal with. And the fact that the 2013 regulations are aligned with as closely as possible to the STCWF helps in that when we are able to explain that if somebody holds a fisherman grade 3, this is equivalent to fishermen, we give them the equivalency tables so that they can compare to the STCWF, and it becomes Namibia's decision as to whether they're going to accept that that certificate or not. And fortunately, they do accept that. But whether if the status quo remains, that would be they would be able to accept that. That's something for some for them that Namibia can answer. The second part, so that's the first part with regards to vessel operators. The second part is with regards to the fishers themselves. Whilst we don't have studies, we do often come across situations of fishers who have found themselves on fishing vessels registered in places like Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and in some instances, less so the Middle East. But those are the queries that we've dealt with since the lockdown started, where other administration are saying somebody's approached us, they want to work here, this is the certificate they've got. We don't have this either on STCW or STCWF. SAMSA explain, and we've had to explain in those situations. So whilst that number is quite low, the question is that we have in our mind is that the few that have gone, it could be that they need to be in those places, or is it that the more those who haven't done so and try to get employment elsewhere, is it because they know that South Africa is not party to or has not implemented the STCWF in full, and as such, that exercise is just going to end in heartbreak with them not getting the employment they seek? So we don't have a straight, the simple answer is no, we haven't done. But there's indications that there's opportunities for South African fishers and for South African fishing vessel operators to be operating outside of the Republic. Thank you.
Thanks, Azwi. We will now take the last question. Colleagues, I say that the questions are coming up on the chat and the colleagues are responding to them. If you feel that the question hasn't been responded to properly, please indicate so on the chat room. Azwi, the next question is from Kevin. And it says, where should fishermen training start? Can we get into schools, especially in fishing community, to start basic education much earlier?
Okay, thanks for that. I think there's you can never start education too early. In my mind, I'm quite pleased sometimes when I see that the Department of Basic Education is bringing in nautical sciences to high schools across the country, the Eastern Cape, Gauteng and KZN have some schools. And the Western Cape with, I think that's where it started with nautical sciences. And I think the difficulty is that where there's no will, particularly political will, it is very difficult to establish education. And the way because you need, when you establish education systems, it needs to be sustainable to the extent that it's not going to be 1 or 2 generations that get that education. And in fishing communities, or in all communities that that are stakeholders in fishing, I think fishing sciences, I don't know if they grade 8, because in some instances it's a family that's going out, and they take the kids, they take everyone to go fishing. So it should, if it's possible, there's resources and there is capacity, it should start as early as possible when people are able to learn sciences at a more at a more application level. Thank you.
Thank you, Azwi. Yes, Nigel, I see you want to say something.
Yeah, just a comment that adds on to Azwi. I think the trick has to be that fishing needs to become a career of choice, not a career of necessity. And we appreciate that in some of the more remote communities, there are no other work prospects other than fishing. If one looks at Iceland, the skipper of a 45-meter trawler there is a respected member of community. He's on a par with the doctor and the lawyer and the rest of it. And that goes right down to the deckhand as well. It's a respected profession. Whereas in South Africa, it's always been a profession of last resort. And until we change that mindset through the work that SAMSA and other people do, then you'll see an uptick in the skills level and people wanting to go into the industry.
Thank you, Captain. And I think for the first step is in that Captain Campbell is that is the formalization of education, so that it's when the likes of the South African Qualifications Authority, the CHE or QCTO, when they do their planning, they proactively include the fishing profession in their brochures that they send out on an annual basis when they publish the list of careers that are available for those who are in different grades or TVETs. And we as an industry need to go there with a bouquet of requirements to say this is what we need professionalized or formalized within that within the higher education sector or training sector.
Okay, thanks, Nigel and Azwi. Colleagues, we've come to the end of part 1 of our program. We will be having a 30-minute break, and after the break, please log in on the links on the link that is provided, so that we can start together part 2 of the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.